I caught my sister in my truck with my best man 4 hours before my wedding. And my parents told me to get over it. Because she'd had a hard year. My family said I was being dramatic, cut ties for 5 years, built a roofing company from nothing in Calgary, and last month my father called from a hospital bed, asking me to save the house. I caught them in the parking lot behind the Legion Hall. The same lot where I'd learned to drive my dad's old F-150, 4 hours before I was supposed to marry Betrayal. My suit jacket was still on the hanger in the truck's back seat. Desmond saw me first through the fogged-up window. Then she did. Nobody said a word for what felt like a full minute. I opened the door, took my jacket off the hook, and walked back into the hall like nothing had happened, because the rehearsal dinner was still going, and 40 people were waiting on toasts. That was 5 years ago. I'm telling this from a house I own outright in the Bridgeland neighborhood of Calgary. In a province where nobody asks about my last name, and nobody knows the man I used to be back in Thunder Bay. My mother called 3 weeks ago. First time I'd heard her voice in over 2 years. She was already crying when I picked up. She said, "Your father's in the hospital and we're losing the house, Theo, we need you." I said, "I built a house. You can come see it sometime." Then I hung up. Let me back up. My name is Theo Kessler. I was 28 the year it happened. Brielle Anders and I had been together 6 years, engaged for 14 months. The wedding was booked for the second Saturday in September, at a vineyard outside Niagara on the lake. Because Brielle's mother insisted Thunder Bay backyard wedding wouldn't photograph well. Total cost came out to $51,000 Canadian. I'd put in 34 of it, most of it savings from 6 years working as a millwright at the paper mill, plus a small RRSP withdrawal. I told myself I'd pay the penalty on and not regret. Brielle's parents covered the rest. 110 guests confirmed. Open bar, because her father said a dry wedding was an insult to the guests. My sister Priya is 2 years younger than me. She'd moved back in parents. That spring after her marriage fell apart in Winnipeg, her husband had cheated on her. Actually, which made everything that came after even harder to swallow. She was supposed to be my maid of honor's backup MC for the night, the one giving the sibling toast. At the rehearsal dinner she stood up with a glass of Prosecco and said, in front of everyone, that she'd never seen me as happy as I was with Brielle, that I deserved every good thing coming to me. People clapped. My mother cried real tears. 3 hours later I found her with Desmond Choi, my best man since grade 9, in the cab of my own truck, parked behind the hall, where nobody would think to look. Because nobody would think to look. The rehearsal dinner wrapped around 10. Brielle went back to her parents' rental cottage on the lake. Old school thing. Bride and groom not seeing each other before the ceremony. Even though we were both pushing 30 and past caring about most of that stuff, except one, tradition. Brielle's mother held onto like a life raft. I went back to the hall to grab the centerpiece samples I'd left in my truck, because the florist needed a final approval text by morning, and I didn't trust anyone else to get the color right. Priya had told my mother she was walking home to clear her head. Desmond had told the groomsman he needed to step out for air. I should have just texted the florist a photo from inside. Instead I walked out back into the gravel lot, and the truck windows were fogged, and the dome light came on automatic. When I opened the door, because the sensors never worked right, since I bought it used, Desmond's face did something I'd never seen a person's face do. Like watching a building come down floor by floor. My sister pulled her cardigan around herself and said my name. Just my name. The way you'd say it if you weren't sure it was really me standing there. I didn't say anything. I reached past them, grabbed the box of centerpiece samples off the dash, and walked back inside. Closed the door soft so the latch wouldn't bang. I didn't throw a punch. I didn't yell. I went back into the hall, smiled at my aunt who wanted a photo, and excused myself 20 minutes later saying I had an early morning. I drove, not toward Brielle's, not toward my apartment. Just drove the 17 out of town. With the gas needle dropping until I hit Nipigon and pulled into a Tim Hortons parking lot at 2 in the morning, and sat there until the sky started going gray over the lake. By 6 a.m. my phone had 41 notifications. 14 missed calls from Brielle. 9 from Desmond. 7 from my mother Anaki. 5 from my father Garrett. 2 from Brielle's mother. 3 from Wyatt, my other groomsman, the only one who hadn't seen anything happen and was just confused why I'd vanished. I read one text from Desmond, sent at 1:40 a.m. It said, "Theo man please. It wasn't planned. We can fix this before tomorrow. Just call me back." Fix it? Fix what? Exactly. So the marriage back together before the florist arrived with peonies at noon? I read one from my mother, sent at 2 a.m. She said Priya had come home in pieces and told her everything. That the family was shattered, but please don't cancel the wedding over this. That Brielle was innocent in all of it. And didn't deserve to lose her day because of Priya's mistake. Innocent. My mother's word, not mine. As if Brielle hadn't been the other half of what I walked in on. I turned my phone off. Sat in that lot until almost 9. The wedding was supposed to start at 3 that afternoon. In 6 hours, 110 people would be filing into a vineyard with string lights and a seating chart I'd spent 2 Sunday nights formatting in a spreadsheet. I called Wyatt, because he was the one person who hadn't tried to talk me down yet. He picked up on the second ring and said, "Theo, where the hell are you? Your mom's losing it." I told him I was 2 hours north, that I wasn't coming back. He went quiet, then said, "Okay, what happened?" I told him. He said, "Jesus Christ." Then he said, "What do you need?" Not what happened next, not calm down, what do you need? I told him to go to my apartment, pack 2 duffel bags, clothes, my laptop, my toolbox from the storage locker, the folder of documents in my desk drawer. Leave the rest. He asked where to bring it. I gave him an address for a Husky truck stop off the highway. I called the vineyard myself around 10, voice flat, and told the coordinator the wedding was off, effective immediately. And that I'd eat whatever cancellation fee was in the contract. She said that fee was $11,000. I told her to bill it to me directly, not to Brielle's family, because some petty part of me wanted there to be a paper trail, showing exactly who paid for what that day. Brielle's father called my phone 9 times before noon. I changed my number that afternoon. Wyatt met me at the Husky around 1 with both duffel bags and my toolbox. He looked at me for a long second and said, "This is bad, man." I said, "This is day 1. He said my mother had called him too, begging to know where I was. I told him not to say anything. He said Priya was telling people it just happened. That it wasn't something she'd planned. Like that made the math different somehow. Monday morning I called a lawyer my old foreman had used for a property dispute. A guy named Okonkwo Hayes out of Thunder Bay. Mostly just to ask what I was walking away from financially. A joint checking account Brielle and I had opened for wedding gifts. $1,800 in it. An apartment lease with 8 months left. An RRSP I'd already dinged once for the wedding. He told me to pull my half of that checking account before she did. I withdrew $900 that afternoon and left the rest. Wednesday I gave notice at the mill. My supervisor, a guy named Patrice who'd trained me on the line 8 years earlier, told me to take a leave instead of quitting outright. That personal stuff blows over. I told him, this wasn't too personal stuff blowing over. This was me leaving the province. He shook my hand and told me if I ever needed a reference, he'd give me one, no questions asked. Thursday I loaded the truck. Everything I owned fit in the cab and the box under a tarp. Tools, clothes, my grandfather's level that he'd given me when I started the trade, the documents folder. The centerpiece sample box I never did throw out, for reasons I still can't fully explain. Friday morning I drove west, 2,200 kilometers. Through Winnipeg, through Regina, through the worst stretch of nothing you've ever seen on the one, and into Calgary on a Sunday evening, with the Rockies still pink from the sunset. I picked Calgary because I'd never been there, and didn't know a single person in the city. No family, no Desmond, no Priya, no wedding gift registry still sitting open on some website somewhere. I rented a basement room in a house near Forest Lawn for $600 a month, shared kitchen with 3 other guys. All of us starting over from something, none of us asking each other why. 3 weeks in, my mother found my new number. To this day I think it was Brielle's mother who passed it along through a mutual cousin. She called on a Tuesday evening and said, "Theo, thank God we've been worried sick." I said, "That's why I left." She said I couldn't just disappear, that I had a family. I said I'd had a family until my sister slept with my best man 4 hours before my wedding. And my mother's first instinct was to protect the bride's feelings instead of mine. She said Priya was destroyed. That she hadn't stopped crying. That she'd lost her brother over one terrible lapse in judgment. I said. She stood up at the rehearsal dinner and told a room full of people I deserved every good thing coming to me. Then she drove with Desmond to the one parking lot in this whole town where nobody would look for either of them. That's not a lapse, that's planning. She didn't have an answer for that. My father got on the phone and said families work through things, that Priya had been through a divorce and wasn't herself, that I owed her some grace. I said, I owed her a sister who didn't sleep with my best man. She owed me that. I don't owe her anything now. I told them not to call that number again. They did anyway. I changed it within the hour. The new number went to 4 people. Wyatt, the lawyer, Patrice for the reference, and my new landlord. That was my entire world for a while. I picked up roofing work my first month in Calgary, $20 an hour. With a small outfit run by a guy named Ferreira, who didn't ask for references because he just needed bodies before hailstorm season hit. Within 4 months Ferreira had me running crews. He told me I managed a job site better than guys who'd been doing it 20 years and asked where I'd come from. I told him somewhere I wasn't going back to. He said that was good enough for him. Month 6 he offered me a piece of a flip he'd picked up at a tax sale, a beat-up bungalow in Forest Lawn, not far from where I was already renting. I had $11,000 saved. We split materials, I did the labor on evenings and weekends, he handled the listing. We cleared $31,000 profit. My half was 15.5, more money than I'd ever held at once in my life. While I was tearing out drywall in Calgary, Priya and Desmond were apparently building a life back in Thunder Bay. Wyatt kept me posted, not because I asked, just because that's the kind of friend he is. Month 3 he texted that Priya and Desmond were official. That my parents were hosting Sunday dinners for the two of them like nothing had happened. That my old chair at the table still had a place setting in front of it. A place setting, like I'd died instead of left. Month 5. Wyatt texted that Priya was pregnant. That my mother had cried happy tears at the announcement. That my father had shaken Desmond's hand like he was welcoming a son-in-law. Champagne for the brother of my best man, and the sister who'd taken him from me. Month 9. The baby came, a boy, and they named him Lachlan. My grandfather's name, the same grandfather whose level I'd carried 2,000 kilometers west in the back of my truck. I'd told Brielle once, early on, that if I ever had a son I'd give him that name. Priya had been at that dinner. She remembered. I put my phone in a drawer for 2 days after that text. Year 2 Ferreira and I did 3 more flips together. I'd saved close to 70,000. I registered my own numbered company that fall, Kessler Build Group, and bought my first solo project at auction. A 4-plex shell in Forest Lawn for 160,000. Gutted it over 5 months, sold it for 241. While I was pulling permits downtown, my parents were remortgaging their house in Thunder Bay. To help Desmond start a snowmobile dealership. Of all things, a business that needed $40,000 in inventory financing he didn't have, and my parents apparently did. Anstey. On paper, through a home equity line of credit. My mother co-signed. Year 3 my company had 4 people on payroll. 410,000 in revenue. I bought a house in Bridgeland, 3 bedrooms, 390,080 down. The rest on a fixed 5-year mortgage at 4.1%. While I was closing on it, the dealership back home folded after 14 months. Desmond owed suppliers around 29,000. My parents were covering it through the HELOC. Priya and Desmond split not long after. She took Lachlan and moved back into my parents' house, into my old room. The one with the trophy shelf I'd never bothered taking down before I left. Year 4 my company crossed $1 million in revenue, 8 employees on the books. I met a woman named Coralie at a Habitat for Humanity Build My Company, sponsored that summer. She was running the volunteer crew, hard hat pushed back at a stuck-a nail gun. We got coffee after. She asked what I did. I said I build things. She said that's not who you are, that's just what you do, tell me who you are. Nobody had asked me that in 4 years. I told her everything. The parking lot, the gas light, the level I still kept on a shelf in my office. She listened without flinching and said, "You drove 2,000 kilometers, instead of putting your fist through a window. That's either the most disciplined thing I've ever heard, or the saddest." I told her it was both. She said, "What do you want now?" I said, "Something nobody can take from me." She said, "Then build it, I'll be around." We've been together going on 16 months now. And she still runs that volunteer crew every summer. While Coralie and I were renovating our own kitchen on weekends, things back in Thunder Bay kept sliding. Wyatt's Year 4 update. Desmond was living with his parents, no steady job, still owing suppliers from the dealership. My parents' HELOC was maxed. My father's pension, which he'd been counting down the years to collect, had been partially commuted early to cover a lawsuit threat from one of Desmond's suppliers. 62,000 gone, just gone. For a snowmobile dealership that lasted just over a year. My mother tried tracking me down again that year, through a private investigator, who found my numbered company's registration but not my home address set, since I'd registered it to a P.O. box out of habit by then. The investigator called Okonkwo Hayes, who called me. I told him to relay that I was alive, employed, and not interested in contact, and that further attempts would get a harassment complaint filed. The call stopped. Last month Wyatt sent the longest text he's ever sent me. My father had a heart attack in March. Stable now but on a long road back. Can't work the way he used to. The house in Thunder Bay was in arrears on the HELOC. Foreclosure proceedings filed 2 weeks earlier. My mother's income from her job at the school board was around $2,800 a month, nowhere close to covering what they owed. Desmond was somewhere, in Manitoba, not really in the picture for Lachlan anymore. Priya was working part-time at a pharmacy, contributing what she could. Which wasn't much. I read that text sitting on the back deck of my house in Bridgeland, the mountains catching the last light. The way they do most evenings in late summer. 3 days later my mother called from a number I didn't recognize. Turned out it was the hospital's general line. My father had been admitted again for a follow-up procedure. And she was sitting in the waiting room. I almost let it go to voicemail. I picked up out of something closer to curiosity than warmth. She said, "Theo, please don't hang up." I said, "Talk." She told me everything Wyatt already had. The house, the foreclosure date, my father's heart, the HELOC, all of it laid out in a voice that kept cracking. I said, "I know." She said, "You know?" I said, "Why Tots told me everything for 5 years. The HELOC, the dealership. Lachlan's name. I've known the whole time." Quiet on her end for a long stretch. I said, You remortgaged a house you'd lived in for 30 years to fund a snowmobile dealership run by the man who slept with my fiancée 4 hours before my wedding. You cashed out part of Dad's pension to cover his debts. You did that because between the two of us, you'd already decided who the family was going to protect. She started crying. She said, "We made mistakes. Terrible ones. We should have stood by you that night. We should have told Priya and Desmond they were wrong instead of asking you to be the bigger person." I said, "You should have. You didn't. That was 5 years ago, and I'm not who I was then. I own a company. I own a house outright in a city I picked because nobody there knew my name. I have a woman who asks who I am instead of what I do for a living. You're asking me to walk away from that to come fix something Desmond broke and you two funded." She said, "He's not asking for anything. Priya needs help with Lachlan. Your father needs you." I said, "Dad signed off on $62,000 of his own retirement for a man's snowmobile inventory. I didn't make him do that. He chose that the same way he's been choosing for 30 years. That's not on me to undo." She asked, voice barely holding, "Are you really going to let us lose the house?" I sat with that question longer than she expected. I said, "Mom, 5 years ago I sat in a Tim Hortons parking lot in Nipigon at 2 in the morning, on what was supposed to be the night before my wedding. I had $900, a truck, a toolbox, and a family that asked me to be gracious about it. I drove 2,000 kilometers to a city where I knew not one soul. I shared a basement with 3 strangers. I worked roofs for $20 an hour in July heat. I built a company out of a P.O. box and a used truck. Nobody from home checked on me once that whole first year. Nobody chose me. So I chose myself, because none of you did. And now you're calling because the son you set aside is the only one left standing. And you need him to fix what the son you kept broke. The answer's no." "Theo, please," I said, "talk to Priya. She's the one home. Let her figure it out." I hung up. She called twice more. I let it ring out. A text came through later. "Please call me back. Your father's asking for you. Priya can't do this alone." I didn't answer. My father called 2 days after that, from a borrowed phone, voice thinner than I remembered. He said, "Son, I know your mother called. I'm asking you myself, man to man. I'm 66. My heart's not what it was. I gave everything I had to your sister and Desmond, and I know now that was the wrong call. I'm saying it straight. I chose wrong. Come home. Help me fix this." I said, "Dad, you didn't choose wrong once. You chose wrong for 30 years. Every time there was a choice to make between Priya and me, and the night before my wedding was just the loudest example of it. I got a parking lot in Nipigon. That's what I got." He was quiet, then I heard him start to cry, which I don't think I'd ever heard before in my life. He said, "I'm sorry. I know sorry doesn't fix a house." I said, "It doesn't. And I'm not saving a house for a situation 30 years of choosing Priya built. Sell it before the bank takes it from you on worse terms. Find something you can afford. Tell Priya to pick up more shifts." He asked if I'd come back for the sale, just to see the place one more time. I said no. He asked if he'd ever see me again. I told him I honestly didn't know. I don't remember who hung up first. I just remember sitting there on my deck a long while after, watching the light go orange over the foothills, feeling something that wasn't anger and wasn't satisfaction either. Grief, maybe. The old kind that sits exactly where family used to live in your chest. Coralie came out. Didn't ask what happened. Just sat down next to me the way someone does when they already know the wrong people took everything they were going to take. After a while she asked if I was okay. I said my father cried on the phone, first time ever. She said, "That's hard." I said, "Yeah." She said, "You don't owe them." "You know that," I said. "I know it. Knowing and feeling aren't the same room in the house though. Tonight I'm in the wrong one." She put her head on my shoulder, and we stayed out there until it got properly dark and cold the way Calgary nights do even in summer. The house sold 6 weeks later, Wyatt told me, for around $210,000. After the mortgage and the maxed HELOC came off the top. My parents walked away with about $19,000 from 31 years in that house. They're renting a 2-bedroom now, just over $1,400 a month. My father's doing cardiac rehab twice a week. Priya's still working part-time at the pharmacy, raising Lachlan mostly on her own, taking whatever shifts she can get around daycare. Desmond, last anyone heard, is somewhere outside Brandon. Not really part of any of it anymore. And me? I'm in Calgary. My company did just over $1.3 million last year, 12 people on payroll now. I own my house outright as of this spring. Coralie and I are talking about putting an offer in on a piece of land outside the city, somewhere with room for the kind of shop I've always wanted to build. My grandfather's level still sits on a shelf above my desk, next to that same centerpiece sample box from the rehearsal dinner all those years ago. I never did throw it out. Not sentiment exactly. More a reminder that the worst night of my life ended up being the first night of the one I actually wanted. My mother said everything fell apart. She's wrong about that. Everything finally landed where it was always headed. Just not for the people who kept choosing wrong. I was the kid who showed up, who fixed things, who got asked to be the bigger person, while my sister got asked nothing at all. So I chose myself instead, Drove 2,000 kilometers west. And when the phone finally rang 5 years later, I already knew my answer before she finished the question. Not because I'm cold. Because I'm exactly the man this whole thing taught me to become. The one who builds things that last. And knows better now than to keep spending himself on things that were never going to hold.